course, this is a global event, and we have to speak about the function of international in all the world. And you have some data here of more or less all the community, all is moving all the time. But I wanted to keep this to know where you can find, how many communities you can find in all the world. Okay, Jan, you can pass to the slide 2, please.
Doing this kind of presentation. So my name is Jan. I was born in Ho Chi Minh City, and
will they say about you that you shouldn't have left, that it will be hard, that you'll miss home, that it's too risky, that you'll never adjust. But we say you're a pioneer. You'll figure out the answers or find someone who can help. You'll learn the language. You'll land the pitch.
Hello.
You'll the company. You'll find the job. You'll adjust, you'll succeed, and you'll thrive. Your life abroad will never be the same as the one you left behind, and you'll never be the same either. You'll discover abilities you didn't know you had, and new friends you don't know how you lived without. You live in places you never imagined, and have experiences you only dreamed about, and overcome challenges you never thought you'd face. And we'll be there, every step of the way.
Yes, I wanted only to share this, only before starting with Jan, is to know that you are in international, connecting global minds, and it's more or less that what you can find in this community. But
so I'm going to show you first where the Vietnamese people are from. So we have to go back to ancient Vietnam in 2800 before Christ. So the Vietnamese people are from that orange part here, the Van Lang region. I'm going to show you how the civilization was. It was during the Bronze Age. It was a hunting tribe, and it was a monarchy. It was first independent. I'm going to show you all the states that surrounded Vietnam. In the south of Vietnam, there were the Khmer people, that is the current Cambodia. In the north, the Zhou states, who were the former, one of the first dynasty in China, Hindu Republic on the west. And then the Chinese people started to expand their empire. So we had the third Chinese invasion in 111 years before Christ. So the Chinese are from here, and they started to expand to the south. So they just conquered the Van Lang Kingdom of Vietnam. So we have been invaded and dominated by the Chinese for almost 1,000 years. So with the Chinese invasion, we acquired a lot of Chinese influence in our culture as well. For about 1,000 years of Chinese, after 1,000 years of Chinese domination, we've been able to get independent only 900 anno dominum. And so now
sorry, I am going to stop the micro to everybody because I listen some noise. I am going to close your micro too. You are going to open when I tell you. Wait, I need to close to everybody because I listen. Okay, yes, you can go ahead. Okay, thank you.
Now I'm going to unmute again. So when the Vietnamese got independent after 1,000 years of Chinese domination, the Vietnamese states, it's now called Dai Viet, with the former capital Thang Long, that is in nowadays Hanoi. I'm going to pass to the next slides. Here, this another map of Vietnam in 1400. Vietnam is now the blue zone. In the south, there is a Hindu kingdom. It's called Champa. In the south, we have a Buddhist kingdom in the west as well. I'm going to show you how the Vietnamese, when they got independent, all the dynasties in Vietnam, you see even in the dress, they had a lot of Chinese influence as well. It looks like almost China now, after 1,000 years of Chinese domination. Those are the former Vietnamese aristocrats. And it was a rich Vietnamese family too, with a lot of Chinese influence. Then the Vietnamese language had been written with Chinese characters as well. We borrowed the Chinese characters from the domination. It's still independent language. We use the Vietnamese language. That is the language 3,000 years ago, but we use the Chinese characters in order to write the Vietnamese language. Then the Vietnamese had been able to expand their territories. Here I made a map for you to see how they were expanding throughout the years. So the Vietnamese originally are from the north, from that region, and then they started to expand into the south, conquering the Hindu kingdom of Champa and the Buddhist kingdom of Khmer. Till the south here. And then after that, in 1800, the French invaded Vietnam. So Vietnam became a French colony together with Cambodia and Laos. All together, they formed the Indochina. Vietnam was then divided in 3 regions in order for the French to conquer more easily. The Tonkin region in the north, the Annam region in the middle, and the Cochin China in the south. Here is a propaganda you can see of the French colony. Now Vietnamese now is written in the Latin alphabet. When the French people came, they turned the former Chinese characters into a Latin alphabet in order for people to learn and read more easily. So our current alphabet is now like the Latin alphabet, and with the accents in order for us to pronounce the tones. In Vietnamese, we have 6 tones. Here it's written: thống chế đã nói Đại Pháp kháng khích với Thái Bình, như dân quê với đất ruộng. It's a French propaganda saying that thanks to the French colony, there had been peace in Vietnam and helping the peasants to be prosperous as well. But we see another reality as well because of the French colony. Many of the Vietnamese had been kept in servitude of the French. So the Vietnamese, the most of the population worked for the French as their personal military and cooks and house chores. Here you can see a rehabilitation camp where the French used to punish the Vietnamese for disobeying their orders. Here in Saigon, le repas d'intérieur puni de prison. Here a Vietnamese, here a French in the carriage and with a Vietnamese pulling him. And when the Vietnamese disobeyed the French order, there had been very severe repression as well. Here you have a very awful image of 3 Vietnamese women who had been decapitated by the French for disobeying their laws. And those are the Vietnamese working for those French people. Then, after almost 150 years of colonization by the French, the Vietnamese people had enough. And then Ho Chi Minh, that was the former communist leader of Vietnam, declared independence in 1945, just after World War II, because French people, they hadn't been able to manage well their colony after the World War II. So they enter into the Indochina War, the French against the Vietnamese wanting independence. The Vietnamese got independent in 1954, almost 10 years of war. After the war, Vietnam entered into a civil war. Vietnam.
Okay, wait.
Sorry, I'm just finishing here.
Mesas 7 são sofás e 9 é lá atrás.
Isso. 7 e mais 9 ali. Vietnam, after being independent from the French colony, they got split into 2 states. In the north here, the North Vietnam, with its capital Hanoi, it is a communist state. And in the South Vietnam, with the capital as Saigon, is a capitalistic state. So the North was in conflict with the South. There had been the US involvement in the South in order to support the regime of South Vietnam. So there had been like a war, a very serious war, almost 20 years of war. Then in Northern Vietnam won the war in 1975. So Vietnam got unified again into a single state as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam we know nowadays. Vietnam acquired the regime from the North, so it's nowadays a communist country with Hanoi as its capital. Here, as you can see, the whole Vietnam reunified. I looked for a video that is going to summarize what I just said. Let me see.
Sorry, there is something black in the screen of the video. You can close and share other time. Sometimes there is Zoom that puts something black. Yes, now it's good. Perfect.
Oh, perfect.
Now you can go ahead. Okay, cool.
Stretching along the coast of Southeast Asia, with dense mountains and jungles to the west, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam is home to approximately 100 million people. Vietnam's history has been shaped through its geography, maritime trade, as well as its tumultuous relationship with its neighbor China to the north. Since prehistoric times, Vietnam's Red River Delta has been a population center due to its fertile soil and defensible location. Feudal communities of rice growers began to develop in this region and eventually confederated to form the Kingdom of Van Lang, which corresponds to the Bronze Age Dong Son material culture. Along the southern coast, the separate Sa Huyn seafaring culture developed strong ties with the western central Philippine archipelago. The Lac Viet people of Van Lang united with the Yu people of Nam Kam to form O Lac in 257 BC. The ancient Yu people are the ancestors of the modern Thai-speaking peoples of northern Vietnam, such as the Nung. Short hair, tattoos, and the practice of teeth blackening were all cultural aspects originating with the Yu. Ulak had a significant uniting influence, however it only lasted the one long reign of its founding monarch. In response to the first Chinese emperor Qin Shi Huang and his successors' expansion southwards, the many Yu tribes in the region united and formed a powerful kingdom of Nan Yu, which became wealthy through the exportation of ivory, pearls, and precious woods from the jungles of Vietnam. As China reunited under the Han Dynasty, they began to extract tribute from Nan Yu. Eventually, this was not enough to satisfy the Han Emperor. Nan Yu was invaded and incorporated into the Han Empire. Han Chinese rule was marked with failed attempts to assimilate the Viet populace into the larger homogenized Chinese culture, particularly with common women who enjoyed far greater autonomy and cultural status than their Chinese counterparts at the time. In 40 AD, two daughters of a military prefect rebelled after one of their husbands was executed by the Han. The Trung sisters ambushed the small local garrison of their village and began taking other cities and towns. The Chinese did not initially take their rebellion seriously and responded incompetently, and were defeated time and again by the sisters, who had raised an army of 80,000, including a sizable number of women and villagers whom they had trained. The young Trung sisters, still in their 20s, established local rule and were both crowned as queen and viceroy. Their reign would be short, as a Han veteran general with an overwhelming force was dispatched. Depending on the source, the Trung sisters were either executed, died in battle, or committed suicide to avoid capture. According to Chinese sources, their decapitated heads were sent back to the Han capital as a trophy. During the second Chinese domination of Vietnam, the rebellions would continue whenever there was internal instability in the empire. To the south, the venerable kingdom of Champa formed from an amalgamation of Sahuin culture and various other seafaring peoples in the region. They were greatly influenced by the Indianized Funan Empire to their south, and widely adopted Hinduism and Buddhism. In 544, after 2 centuries of failed rebellions, the Vatsuan kingdom was established by a local magistrate of non-Yu descent who granted himself the title Southern Emperor. It would take nearly another 60 years till a large enough invasion could be organized to retake Nam Viet. Over the next 300 years, there were 8 major rebellions. Eventually, the Tang dynasty granted the Vietnamese the status of an autonomous vassal, as long as they would make regular tribute payments. Shortly after the Tang collapse, the Viet were able to gain full independence from the Southern Han. Over the next 60 years, a period where 12 warlords ruled over a divided country, and 3 short-lived dynasties ensued. Despite the disunity of this period, a major Song Chinese invasion was repulsed in 981. Stability was eventually brought about by the Li dynasty, who instituted equal rule of law rather than the whims of an autocrat. The stable 216-year reign of this dynasty ended in a palace coup. The 6-year-old empress was overthrown, and her 7-year-old husband of the Tran clan was made emperor in a relatively peaceful transition. The Tran dynasty is most renowned for repulsing not 1, 2, but 3 Mongol invasions of Vietnam, most famously in 1288 when a massive Mongol fleet was utterly eviscerated. War between the Dai Viet and Champa broke out after the Viet emperor's sister was married to the Cham king, who died a year later. According to Cham tradition, she was to be cremated with him at his funeral, where she was rescued by Viet funeral guests, sparking all-out war and the Viet conquest of Champa. The occupation was short-lived, and the Tran dynasty fell into internal infighting with some of the family allying with the Cham. This began another chaotic period with multiple short-lived dynasties and a brief Chinese Ming dynasty domination of Vietnam. This period was followed by the longest-lasting Viet dynasty, the later Li, which firmly incorporated Champa as a vassal state. However, as time went on, the Champa, Ming-backed Mac in the north, Trin, and Nguyen lords all acted as independent states with their separate capitals and armies, with the Li dynasty emperor eventually only acting as a ceremonial leader. The Trin and Nguyen lords fought in several wars attempting to unite the country. Firearms were rapidly adopted by both armies during these wars, supplied by French, Dutch, and Portuguese merchants. The lavish lifestyles of the nobility and the toils of war on the majority of the population led to a mass peasant revolt led by the Tai Sun brothers, who briefly ruled the country. Through a turbulent period where another Chinese invasion was fought off seeking to reinstate the Li emperor, the unstable rule of the Tai Sun was overthrown by the resurgent Nguyen, who consolidated the country and expanded its territory in alliance with Siam and France, who supplied them weapons, in exchange for a trade monopoly. Over time, the relationship became strained, as Vietnamese emperors sought to reduce growing French influence. After jailing Catholic missionaries entering the country illegally, French Emperor Napoleon III invaded, using this as pretext, taking land in the south and negotiating a favorable treaty. 2 decades later, the French would conquer the rest of Vietnam, and continue to take territory from the Siamese Empire. During World War II, the Empire of Japan would occupy French Indochina, rolling through a puppet emperor as the French had done. The Japanese occupation was countered by the Vietnamese, communist rebels whom were led by Ho Chi Minh. After the war, he declared independence for the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The monarchy was disestablished, and a 7-year-long war with the French began. The Soviet Union and Communist China supported the Viet Minh, while the United Kingdom and United States supported France. After the war ended, the Geneva Accord partitioned French Indochina into Communist Democratic Republic of Vietnam, the State of Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Vietnamese Catholics moved south, while Viet Minh moved north. The following year, a referendum was held, which overwhelmingly decided that the South would not be reunited with the North. Communists in the South alleged mass vote rigging and formed the Viet Cong. Backed by China, the North began aiding the Viet Cong. While fearing communist expansion throughout the region, the U.S. began aiding the South, beginning the Second Indochina War, or simply the Vietnam War. This aid was slowly increased to air support, and in 1965, 3,500 U.S. Marines were deployed. By the end of that year, more than 200,000 U.S. military personnel had been deployed to South Vietnam. The war would be a long and brutal affair. In 1970, North Vietnam invaded Cambodia in support of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. The United States and South Vietnam invaded as well in retaliation. After this escalation, anti-war sentiment began to steadily grow in the United States. By 1973, President Nixon, who was embroiled in the midst of the Watergate scandal, ceased all bombing of the North, and subsequently pulled all troops out of Vietnam. North then began to rapidly advance towards Saigon as refugees poured south, fearing the communist regime's vengeance. In April 1975, Saigon fell, and the war was effectively over, establishing the Socialist Republic of Vietnam the following year. This has been Epimetheus, and I hope you really enjoyed that lightning-fast version of Vietnamese history. Let me know in the comments.
All right, here it was a summary about the history of Vietnam, what I
country's
told
history.
you. So now we are going to talk about Vietnamese demographics. I'm going to show you all the different ethnic people that are in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, in total, there are 54 ethnies. The biggest ethnic, the largest ethnics in Vietnam are, of course, the Viet people, who account about 85% of the total Vietnamese population. We call ourselves Viet or Kin as well. Then the second largest ethnics are the Thai. Those people are more similar, have a culture more similar into the people in Thailand, and they speak the Thai language. It account only 1.89% of the total population. So you see, like in total, the Vietnamese are the largest ethnic majority in Vietnam, and then there are small fractions of diverse ethnic groups. So like 1% of each small ethnic groups. We can say that Vietnam is ethnically diverse because of its history and its territorial expansion as well. You can see that all of those ethnics, they have their own rights, their own clothes, traditional clothing as well, and their own language. It's actually a lot of tribes, about 54. Okay, I'm not going to show you all the tribes because there are a lot, but it was just for you to know all the main tribes in Vietnam. So let's pass to the next slide. Here was a video that Carolina wanted to show you. So now we are on a break. So Carolina.
I wanted to, yes, here, yes, this is, yes, now is to give a break to him because, yes, we don't know, it's good to stop a little. And here I wanted to share something that here in Paris, we have a garden where we can visit all the colonization in France. And I wanted to share this video. It's in French, but you can leave the sound if you want, or you put, it's only to show you this garden. I have shared here in September 2020. We have made a picnic there. It was very nice. Yes, perfect. You can go play. We are going to see the video. You can leave the sound, Jan, because it's in French.
Le site est très marqué par l'exposition coloniale qui a eu lieu ici en 1907. Il faut transporter un petit peu en arrière. On était vraiment au cœur ici de l'exposition et d'une ambiance très particulière où on venait se restaurer à la mode congolaise, voir des animaux africains qu'on n'avait jamais vus en France encore à l'époque, prendre un thé à la menthe, un loukoum au pavillon de la Tunisie, voir ce qu'il y avait de plus précieux dans le pavillon de l'Indochine, qui montrait en même temps toutes les informations pour partir. Ça fonctionnait puisque l'exposition coloniale a reçu plus de 2,5 millions de visiteurs entre mai et octobre 1907. Alors, l'allée qui est derrière moi distribue en fait le jardin en deux moitiés, les anciennes colonies d'Afrique, les anciennes colonies d'Asie. Dans les bâtiments africains, on commence par le pavillon de la Guyane, le casque de la Réunion, le bâtiment du Congo qui a péri dans un incendie en 2005. De l'autre côté, en plus du pavillon de Tunisie que je vois derrière moi, le pavillon asiatique, avec le nouveau temple souvenir de Shiva, la porte Tao, le grand stupa qui est en Bouddha. Le jardin est dit tropical, mais il vaudrait peut-être mieux l'appeler exotique. En plus de ces variétés exotiques, il y a une flore locale indigène assez intéressante qui est favorisée par la gestion douce écologique du site. Dans les espaces verts parisiens. L'ambiance est très particulière, c'est un vœu délibéré de l'entretenir au minimum.
Here in the video, please. Yes, I wanted to share because the sound is not too good. I think the connection is bad. I wanted only to share that this is Jardin, that we have here in Paris. Is in Bois de Vincennes, and yes, we had done a picnic here in my group of brunch and picnic, and in last year, and it's something where you can find La Maison de la Conchinchine that we have talked before here in Vietnam. Is the red house that you see, and yes, and you have another countries, and it's something that they wanted to keep in France to know a little about all the colonization that they did in all the world. It's only this, but if you want, you can stop sharing, Jan, because we're going to create a breakout room. Lucia is going to create 10 rooms in random. I'm going to do, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to continue. So let's see. So I'm still talking about the demographics of Vietnam. So in nowadays, I'm going to present you the religions that are in Vietnam. So as you know, Vietnam is a multicultural country as for its religions as well. In Vietnam, in total, we are around 96,000,000 people. 96,000 million people. So, so almost half of them practice the traditional Vietnamese religion, the folk Vietnamese traditional religions. I'm going to show you in the next video. Then 20 million follow Buddhism, 10 million are atheists, and 9 million are Christians, and there are then several other religions that practice the ethnic minorities. So let's focus on what Vietnamese traditional religions we have. I made a video for you to see to explain one of the main Vietnamese traditional religion. Let us see here.
How many hours of your life do you dedicate to your religion? In Vietnam, people devote many hours to their religion, but the most impressive is Cao Dai.
They come to temples for ceremonies 4 times a day.
At 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., and midnight, practitioners of Cao Dai gather to worship. These are everyday people, just like you and me. Mr. Hao, a professional tour guide in Vietnam, is also a religious man.
I believe that when you did a good thing, when you die, you get to come to heaven, or not, down to the hell.
In Saigon, the Jade Pagoda was built in the early 20th century. Here, 3 religions are observed: Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. Buddhism and Catholicism are the biggest religions in Vietnam. Cao Dai draws heavy influence from both.
Establishing about the Vietnamese culture, the first is the word Buddhism, because Buddhism were introduced to Vietnamese people just right after we got independent. It was the 10th century. Because we live next to China and we get much influence from Chinese, so that's why.
Cao Dai was founded in 1926. The full name of the religion translates to the Great Faith for the Third Universal Redemption. The founder wanted to unite all religions. The symbol of the faith is the left eye of God, representing the yang or masculine energy. It's balanced by the nurturing and restorative spirit of the yin of the feminine.
The 3 main colors in the Cao Daism, the blue, the red, and yellow. The blue one is represent for Taoists, and the red one is represent for Confucius, and yellow one is represent for Buddhism.
These everyday people in Vietnam, 4.4 million of them, practice their religion with deep devotion, engaging in prayer, veneration of ancestors, nonviolence, and vegetarianism with one goal in their heart: a more perfect union with God.
We are human beings. In some situation, we could not do anything. So that's why we have something to believe in, to pray for, to ask for blessing.
So yes, I wanted to show you one of the very specific Vietnamese religion that exists in no other parts of the world, only in Vietnam. So now we are going to talk about the current Vietnamese and pandemic response in nowadays COVID era. In order to summarize, Vietnam has been one of the most successful country being able to contain the spread of COVID-19. So I'm going to list here some of the policies the government has done so far. Vietnam suspended the entry of all foreigners from last year already, and it's still on. So no one can enter Vietnam except if you are a diplomat, any government officials, or foreign investor, or some experts and skilled workers. When you are an expert and skilled workers, you have to prove that you have a work permit in order to enter Vietnam. And everyone who enters Vietnam must go through a quarantine of 14 days in government facilities or hotels. Vietnam has been so far very successful in containing the spread of COVID because it has a very centralized government policy, and Vietnam also is a authoritarian country. So you must comply with the rules. When you do not comply with the Vietnamese government rules, you can have very serious problem, as it is an authoritarian and communist country. So you need to comply all the government policies. Vietnam has been very successful because it has been able to prevent COVID from entering Vietnam before it spread out, thanks to containment strategy with comprehensive testing for everyone and systematic quarantining as well. Vietnam hasn't got much economic and health capacity, so it was more in prevention than curing COVID. I'm going to show you so far some of the measures the government did. So propaganda about COVID everywhere in the street. Really everywhere you can see those kind of propagandas. And you know, the Vietnamese people, they are already used to using the chirurgical mask as well, because in our cities, there are a lot of pollution as well. So in most of the Vietnamese, they ride their motorcycle to go to work. So we already are very used to using the mask in order not to breathe the pollution. And the government, in order to slow down the spread of COVID, when one person is suspect of COVID, they isolate the whole community. They isolate the whole neighborhood where the person was. So here you can see khu vực cách ly. It means quarantine area. So you see they close entire neighborhood. So one person who has COVID has to stay there, and all their neighbors, their family, have to stay there as well. Here in the picture, you can see a government facility for the people who arrive in Vietnam. They must stay there for 14 days of quarantine. Here is also another quarantine area. So as of April the 16th, we have in total, we have had in total 2,772 coronavirus cases. Among them, 2,445 have recovered, and 35 deaths from COVID. So it has been one of the world's best results so far. And here I found a video to summarize what I just said. Let us see the video.
As cases of coronavirus continue to spike overseas, notably in Brazil and India, one nation from the outset sought to beat COVID-19 and has apparently succeeded: Vietnam. Bordering China, the similarly authoritarian country instituted mass quarantines and social distancing. And as special correspondent Mike Saray reports, they flattened the curve.
When China sneezes, Vietnam is the first to catch the cold, as the Vietnamese like to say. Given their shared border, the 2003 SARS virus outbreak spread from China to Vietnam first. With fewer than 1,000 ICU beds for its more than 90 million people, this time Vietnam simply couldn't afford to let the coronavirus spread out of control and overrun its healthcare system. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control's representative in Hanoi is Dr. Matt Moore.
The public here in Vietnam has really bought into this. They really feel shared ownership of the problem of COVID-19. And I think, again, it's because of those early successes where the government was carrying out pretty strong measures that for us in the West, we might consider them to be sort of draconian, but they were really effective.
Vietnam and the U.S. had their first COVID cases the same week at the end of January. But Vietnam's pandemic task force was operational in a week instead of a month for its U.S. counterpart. Both countries issued air travel bans from China and abroad, but Vietnam also medically screened international arrivals, requiring 14-day self-quarantines and mandatory quarantines for those traced to anyone with symptoms or testing positive. Until it could ramp up its limited testing capacity, Vietnam targeted hotspots, quarantined those testing positive at medical facilities, and contact traced those they had been in contact with. They were quarantined usually at military sites for 2 weeks or until they tested negative. Vietnam's shelter-in-place and social distancing restrictions were also more strictly enforced.
It takes a lot of human resource to track contacts of potential cases and control these clusters, and they did have the human resources to do that.
Dr. Todd Pollack heads up the Harvard Medical School's Partnership for Health Advancement in Vietnam. He and other Western medical advisors believe Vietnam's relatively low COVID numbers are generally backed up by what they observed throughout the crisis.
We can look at the number of patients admitted to the hospitals, because in Vietnam they have a policy to isolate all positive cases in health facilities. If it was hit with the thousands, 10,000s, hundreds of thousands of cases that are being seen in other countries, it also would be overwhelmed like other countries. But at the current state, that's not the situation here.
The majority of them were treated at the National Hospital for Tropical Diseases, which had extra capacity and supplies throughout the crisis, according to Dr. Thi Hai Ninh, head of internal medicine.
Vietnam is a developing country, and our resources are limited. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we tried to restrict the number of the patients.
Vietnam literally declared war on the coronavirus. The military was mobilized for healthcare missions, and their bases converted to mandatory quarantine sites. Its largest manufacturing companies converted to producing PPE and test kits, which they are now exporting to the U.S. A mobile app was created for updating COVID hotspot locations and their proximity. COVID got the full enemy treatment on Vietnam's ubiquitous propaganda billboards. Its pop stars banded together to help communicate critical hygiene messaging and rally the country for what was considered to be a personal health and national security threat.
There is good medical care here. It's just that the availability of it, the volume of it is nowhere near a developed country. And because of that, I think, the country and the people here, in terms of its leadership and the people, take these situations much more seriously.
Henry Nguyen is a Vietnamese-American businessman living in Ho Chi Minh City, whom we profiled previously on the News Hour. As the owner of the local McDonald's restaurants and also having a U.S. medical degree, he believes cultural differences allowed the Vietnamese to be more accepting of stricter containment measures than Americans, despite Vietnam having fewer COVID cases.
In the larger picture, maybe there is a little bit more what I'll call a sense of communality in terms of togetherness here, that people say, this is the sacrifice I make for the better good of my family, my community, my city, my country.
Many attribute Vietnam's relative success to its more authoritarian style of government. which allowed for more aggressive and enforced containment measures that could be implemented without delay, public debate, or the civil liberties and privacy issues Americans are guaranteed. Human rights critics fear the government took advantage of the crisis to further advance its public surveillance and online censorship agenda.
We shouldn't ignore the fact that the beliefs and the support of the population are so key in this kind of situation.
One of the first countries outside of China to start shutting down, Vietnam was one of the first to start reopening at the end of April, starting in areas that had gone 21 days without any new community-spread COVID cases, as they continue to follow their so far successful COVID-19 containment strategy.
All right, so as you can see, thanks to the very detailed video, Vietnam has been very successful in containing.
Very interesting, Jan, but if you want, we're going to pass to the food because COVID is not very welcome. It's good to have the information, but it's better to go to the good thing, okay? Go ahead.
So now we are going to talk about, as you know,
this is a chart of Vietnam's GDP per capita since 1990.
I just wanted to add to that to talk about the Vietnamese economy. In addition to its successful COVID response, Vietnam as well is one of the fastest growing country in the world. I'm going to add here a video summarizing.
Over the course of 30 years, it went from $95 to over $2,700, despite its population growing by a quarter. Even after accounting for inflation and local purchasing power, Vietnam experienced a fourfold increase. Over this same period, the poverty rate has dropped from 60% to less than 5%, with the nation becoming a leading exporter. And interestingly, Samsung alone accounts for almost a quarter of the country's exports. As a result, Vietnam's economy has become the poster child for economic development, making massive gains on almost every indicator. Though how did this previously war-torn country turn it all around in the space of 30 years, being the only major Southeast Asian economy to avoid a recession in 2020? To answer this, we need to take a look at what happened to Vietnam's economy after the war. No economic video on Vietnam's meteoric rise can avoid the Vietnam War, or the American War as they call it in Hanoi. This frames the whole context of where the country is today, and most importantly, how it got here. By 1975, the nation's economic infrastructure had been destroyed by war. And at that stage, you would be forgiven for thinking that Vietnam's economy would take off in the post-war period, like so many other economies had done before. Unfortunately for Vietnam though, the country was one of the poorest on the planet, with communist 5-year plans, fixed pricing, and a focus on collectivized agriculture not exactly spurring a great economic awakening. For a long period, Moscow was Vietnam's largest trading partner, with the fully fledged communist nation joining Comecon, not to be confused with a convention hall filled with superheroes. Comecon, or the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, was basically an economic organization to facilitate trade amongst like-minded communist nations, like Cuba or East Germany. However, by the mid-80s, Vietnam's stagnant economy was barely scraping by. It had become clear that full-blown communism wasn't living up to the expectations, and so a new plan was launched, one which would prove fundamental to Vietnam's economic rise. Y Doi Moi was a game-changer. Putting my horrendous pronunciation to one side, the 1986 Doi Moi reforms, or renovation, was a broad-based economic transformation, focused on dismantling a planned economy and opening up a closed system to international trade. The original focus was on agriculture, and this makes perfect sense, considering a staggering 70% of the workforce worked in the fields, despite the nation still being a significant recipient of food aid. The reforms moved away from collectivization and towards individual farming for a profit, where farmers were free to set their own price and keep any profits, which quickly led to a dramatic improvement in agricultural production. However, the reforms didn't stop at agriculture, as stabilizing the economy took center stage. The Vietnamese currency, the dong, was devalued and budget deficits were brought into line. At the same time, inefficient government monopolies or state-owned enterprises were scaled down, from over 12,000 in 1989 to less than 600 in 2016, through multiple rounds of restructuring, sell-offs and mergers. This all went hand in hand with reforms to encourage private businesses, all the way down to the household level. Fast forwarding to the year 2000, a new enterprise law encouraged registration of these new household enterprises from the informal sector to the formal one. Now, it's important to see this process as one built up over time, as a transformation as opposed to a single event, which enabled employment in agriculture and state-owned enterprises to decline as private employment took off from virtually zero. A key outcome of this whole process of reform has been the seemingly unstoppable rise of Vietnam's exports, which, as this graph shows, basically tripled over the last decade, with exports accounting for over 100% of GDP, something which can occur before you balance exports against a nation's imports. The exponential rise in exports has seen the likes of Apple, Samsung and Nike set up shop in the Southeast Asian nation, becoming the region's largest exporter of clothing and the second largest exporter of electronics, after Singapore. Though, how exactly did Vietnam go from one of the poorest economies on the planet to an exporting rising star? Economists often state that Vietnam's exporting prowess is a result of a shift in global production away from China. And whilst this trend is true, it doesn't tell us why Vietnam. Why not any of the other seemingly competing nations on China's doorstep? An oversimplified answer to this would be that foreign investors are incorporating Vietnam into their China Plus One strategy, as they've come to realize that their so-called global supply chain is largely China-centric, and hence vulnerable to unpredictable scenarios, whether that be trade wars or the great decoupling of the US and China. This is usually topped off with a statement about firms seeking to combat rising costs. After all, average manufacturing wages have tripled in the world's second largest economy over the last decade, whilst Vietnam's remains a fraction of the price. But whilst this is all true, it's, well, just a bit cut and paste. So what are the key factors to Vietnam's economic awakening? A great way to look at why Vietnam is such a good substitute for China is to consider the Export Similarity Index. This index allows us to measure how much overlap there is between two countries' exports. Going from 0 to 100, the higher the percentage, the greater the export similarity. As such, a high score implies it will be relatively easier for the substitute country to pick up the exports of the country being compared. So in a comparison of Asian countries to China on this index, Vietnam ranks first. Why may this be the case? Well, if we look at the top 10 exports of both countries, they share 7 of 10 sectors, including electrical machinery, computers, clothing, and furniture. So the fact that both countries have had great years for exports, defying the global downturn, is less of a surprise. As we mentioned in our Why China Avoid the Recession video, the global change that I'm working has created a surge for new computers, electricals, and furniture. Just like China, has been great news for Vietnam, as exports grew by over 10% in Q3 alone. But the similarity in exports alone, whilst important to understanding the trend, still doesn't explain the full why. As mentioned earlier, Vietnam's reform process, which started back in the mid-80s, was a gradual one. If you go through the legislation over the years, trade liberalization stands out as a key theme, and the Vietnamese have pursued this aggressively. If you were to consider a timeline of pro-trade agreements, one of the first things Vietnam did was to create the Foreign Investment Law in 1987. This enabled foreign-owned companies to enter into its closed domestic market. In 1994, the US ended its trade embargo on Vietnam, paving the way for it to join the ASEAN Free Trade Area in 1995. In 2000, it signed a free trade agreement with the US. And most importantly perhaps, it joined the World Trade Organization in 2007, which dramatically lowered tariffs to a host of countries. More recently, it signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, an Asian-based free trade agreement covering a third of the global economy. Overall, Vietnam has signed well over a dozen free trade agreements, being a bit of a champion when it comes to free trade-based development economics. To help capitalize on these free trading opportunities, Vietnam has invested a lot in its human capital, which goes against any preconceptions of Vietnam just being a magnet for cheap labor. According to the PISA Standard International Testing, which ranks countries by the exam scores of their 15-year-olds, Vietnam outcompetes most developed economies when it comes to reading and maths, ranking an impressive 4th for science. And investment in its population isn't just something based in the classroom. Vietnam's Human Capital Index has increased from 0.66 to 0.69 since 2010. This means that a child born today will be 69% as productive as he or she could be if they enjoyed a complete education and full health. Now, a score of 69 may not sound great, but this puts Vietnam first amongst all middle-income nations. And for context, the highest score in the world is 88, which is very much an outlier achieved by Singapore. And like so many other developing economies, Vietnam is tipped to benefit from an emerging middle class, something boosted by the nation's very high participation rate of 80%. Compared to only 65% in comparable developing countries. This high rate reflects the increased prevalence of women in the workplace at over a quarter more than the global average, an encouraging trend which points to broader-based economic opportunities. Now, all of this is good and well, with Vietnam making remarkable progress over the last 3 decades, but it's still a far way from achieving its economic goal of becoming a high-income country by 2045. So, what are Vietnam's key challenges? A lot of Vietnam's recent success has been based on positioning itself as a relatively cheaper manufacturing base. This has provided the jobs necessary to propel the nation's economy into middle-income status. However, Vietnam is still at a relatively early stage in this transition. This expansion in jobs is threatened by increasing automation, which is set to erode Vietnam's comparative advantage in cheap labor, creating a headache in more ways than one. Because, principally, Vietnam is still an agricultural-based workforce, with just under 40% working in agriculture, and less than a quarter of the workforce possessing an employment contract. This stark subdivide between the formalized and informalized economy is a trend which carries through to foreign direct investment. A common criticism is that it facilitates economic dualism. In many cases, foreign direct investment is largely void and separate from the local economy, with the bulk of the benefits yet to merge into the domestic market. And even Vietnam's success in exports has started to gather negative attention, particularly from the US, as Vietnam has the 3rd highest trade surplus with the States, after China and Mexico. The US Treasury Department put the nation on a list of top 10 currency manipulators early in 2020, going on to launch a Section 301 investigation, which is the exact same process they used to place tariffs on billions of dollars of Chinese imports. Something which, if ever happened to Vietnam, could seriously dent any plans to move export-orientated manufacturing out of China to service the US market. Importantly, when it comes to many developing countries, a common theme is a young population which will present a demographic dividend. And for Vietnam, over the last 30 years, its population has grown by more than 25%. But the country actually has one of the fastest aging populations on the planet. On current trends, its elderly population, which is defined as those over 65, will double from 7 to 14% by 2035, at which point Vietnam will officially be considered an aged society. The pace of this change has economists worried, being 5 years faster than Singapore. So much so that Japan, the world's leading expert in how to handle an aging population, has set up a knowledge-sharing platform with the World Bank to help Vietnam manage this transition, which will be a huge undertaking for a country which is yet to fully tread the development path so many of its neighbours have done before it. So overall, we've seen that Vietnam has made remarkable progress over the last 3 decades from an extremely low base, especially when you consider that just under 40% of the population still work in agriculture. The reforms of 1986 onwards cannot be understated, initially in agriculture and then spreading throughout the rest of the economy and society at large. It would be an oversimplification to say that Vietnam's success has been built on an exodus from China, without mentioning what has made the nation so appealing, which includes its commitment to free trade, investment in human capital, and an emerging middle class. But there is a very real concern that Vietnam won't be able to follow the same development path as so many nations did before it, due to the challenges of automation, prospects of tariffs, and one of the fastest aging populations on the planet. And now it's over to you. Do you think
so that's summarize practically the whole Vietnamese economic situation.
Vietnam will continue
now we are going to see the fun part. I'm going to show you now some very interesting touristic spots for people who are eager to travel to Vietnam and discover all of its wonder. I'm going to show you some video of some touristic propaganda that we have. Another video here.
What I love about Vietnam, the country itself, is the people. They're pragmatic people. They do what they say. They're very honest, they're very honorable people, and they're hardworking people, and they go for it. They don't want to fail. No one wants to fail, but they're ready to do something. And then if that doesn't work, they close it up, that shop, and try something new.
And so I made an itinerary for those wanting to visit Vietnam. So I wanted to show you like all the path you should do from the south into the north of Vietnam. So it's here the map and the itinerary I made. So here for work in the south, you can go up there to Cần Thơ, where this the Mekong Delta, Ho Chi Minh City, the largest financial city in Vietnam, Đà Lạt, Buôn Ma Thuột, Da Nang, Hue, go up to see the caves, to Ha Long Bay, Hanoi, and Sapa. I'm going to show you better the images here. In the south, we have very beautiful beaches on Phu Quoc Island, very lively markets on the Mekong Delta. This is the floating market. In the very interesting city full of cultures and nightlife, Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. Đà Lạt is a French colonial city, very nice climate and architecture. In central Vietnam, we have a place where some ethnic minorities are, with fun tours with the elephants, Hoi An, UNESCO heritage site you should definitely visit, on an old town that is very beautiful. Also in central Vietnam, you have Phong Nha National Park, where there are the largest caves in the world, and the very old temples and tombs in Hue. In northern Vietnam, it's especially interesting for its landscapes, as there is the Ha Long Bay. The Ninh Binh as well is very nice, and some ethnic minorities as well in the mountains in Sapa. It's very interesting to see the ethnic diversity. And Hanoi, that is the oldest capital of Vietnam, the oldest capital of the Vietnamese people. But Vietnam is very interesting too about food. I think this is the most interesting part of Vietnamese culture. Vietnam is one of the most diverse country about its food. I'm going to show you some of the best food from my city, from Ho Chi Minh.
I'm Nagi from Recipe Tune Eats, and I'm in Ho Chi Minh City, the food capital of Vietnam. The heart and soul of Saigon is the street food, and in Saigon, great street food is everywhere. So what should you eat? Where should you eat it? Here's my top 10. First up, vermicelli rice noodles with pork. Various forms of these noodle bowls have found their way overseas, but there's nothing like the real thing. In Vietnam, they're called bun thit nung, and they come topped with marinated grilled pork, a crispy spring roll, fresh lettuce, and herbs. You douse it generously with nuoc cham, the sweet savoury sauce that makes an appearance alongside virtually every dish in Vietnam. Mix it all up, then dig in. Bun Thit Nung Chi Tuyen is one of the most well-known places in Saigon, and they've been serving these noodle bowls for over 40 years. Business here is swift and furious, especially on the takeaway side. Crowds of delivery drivers hover, waiting to pick up orders. There's even a guy grilling full-time on the street, barbecuing mountains of pork that gets whizzed back to the restaurant by motorbike to keep orders flowing. I'm a huge fan of noodle bowls in all forms, and these ones are extreme noodle deliciousness that should not be missed. Another must-try is broken rice, com tam. It's a breakfast plate with rice that's literally small broken grains of rice topped with pork and other toppings. Com tam Ba Gien is one of the city's most famous broken rice restaurants. Mighty pork loin steaks are marinated, then barbecued to order over smouldering coals. It's served over fluffy broken rice cooked over charcoal, with pickled vegetables and a prawn or pork cake on the side. It also comes with a side of what looks like noodles, but is actually pig skin. Make sure to order a fried egg on top. The yolk oozes like a sauce and elevates this epic dish from incredible to can't stop eating it good. I truly believe that Vietnam makes some of the greatest soup broths in the world, and this spicy beef lemongrass soup is another one that you should definitely hunt down. It's called bun bo hue, and it's a noodle soup with a rich beef broth infused with lemongrass, shrimp, and a good slosh of fiery chili oil. It tastes like pho on steroids. It's got a stronger flavour, and boy is it spicy. This place, Dong Ba, is a local favourite that's been around since the 1920s and turns up on many best of Saigon lists. The friendly staff bustle around the kitchen, stirring huge cauldrons of the spicy broth and ladling soup over soft rice noodles. It's topped with tender slices of beef, fresh herbs, and a good sprinkle of pepper. Then you help yourself to toppings. More herbs, a drizzle of lime, and more chili if you dare. I dared and I suffered. This place might look like it needs a good spring clean, but you need to look past that because this is one of the best bowls of soup you will ever have. This next place I want to show you isn't a dish, it's a food experience area that's well worth a visit. It's an area called Nguyen Twin Twat Apartments. Someone affectionately dubbed it Street Food Ghetto, and now we do too because it's easier to pronounce. It's a local area and it's pumping. I'm in my element here. This is what I love about travelling. Seeing the real local areas, getting away from the tourist traps. As you stroll down the winding alleys, you'll see crowds of locals going about their daily routine and vendors serving up all sorts of tasty foods. Crispy rice pancakes grilled over charcoal and filled with shrimp, egg and slathered with butter. There's giant oysters, noodles, fresh soft rice paper rolls filled with beef, stir-fried fresh corn, and when you see how much butter she uses to fry it up, you know it's going to be tasty. But my favourite food here are sea snails. Yes, snails. They taste like mussels, and in Saigon, snail stores are the equivalent of pubs back at home. Locals gather with family and friends, sitting on tiny plastic stools on the side of the road, drinking ice-cold beers and ordering plate after plate of snails. Our favourite snail joint is this one, called Ok An. The snails are displayed out the front of the store so you can see what looks good and fresh. You choose your snail and how you want it cooked, then they cook it up to order. Tossing snails over fiery hot heat with incredible sauces, braising them in rich coconut curries. There's a whole menu of ways to prepare these snails, and every single one I've tried has been amazing. Here are a couple of my favourites. Mud crawlers in an addictive coconut sauce, and snails in an incredible garlic butter sauce. Snails are an unexpected highlight of food in Ho Chi Minh City, and there was never any doubt that it was going to make my top 10. And now I'm going to show you what I think is the best pho in Ho Chi Minh City. It's a place called Pho Tao Bay and it's a huge favourite with locals. You won't see any tourists here and that's just how I like it. The tangle of slippery rice noodles are silken yet chewy and it's topped with tender slices of beef brisket and the signature raw beef slices that are cooked until pink when the hot broth is poured over it. I love coming here for the breakfast rush, watching the locals go about their day and the staff serving up bowl after bowl of piping hot pho. And even though it's 35 degrees and incredibly humid, this is still the best bowl of pho I've ever had in my entire life. Here's one of the best new things you'll try in Vietnam, bololot. It's made with seasoned beef mince that's wrapped in wild betel leaves then barbecued on a charcoal grill. They look like little green cigars, and they can be eaten just like that, or in a DIY meal setup where it's served alongside rice paper, lettuce, noodles, herbs, and pickled vegetables. Bundle it all up, dip it in sauce, and devour. You won't find it in District 1, you'll need to get out to the local areas. Restaurant Ko Liang in District 3 is one of the best known bololot restaurants in Saigon. A family-owned establishment that's highly rated by locals, they're known for their incredibly juicy bololot flavoured with a secret spice blend. I guarantee you will not be able to stop at one because they are that good.
So I'm going to stop the video here because there are literally thousands of dishes in Vietnam, so I'm not going to be able to show you everything. You have to go there and experience it by yourself. And in order to close this presentation, I'm going to show you a last video of Ho Chi Minh City, how life is there.
Growing up in Ho Chi Minh City, I find myself surrounded by all these new values and the old values. So there are certain days that I need to wake up very early for work, getting out there on the street with my motorcycles, riding along the river and seeing the city waking up. I always think of Tom Tam for my breakfast. I like it a lot for its characteristics. One of my favorite places in Ho Chi Minh City is Thiên Hậu Pagoda. Arriving there and finding myself really calm. Ho Chi Minh City was changing a lot. It gives me that energy too, growing up and always excited, always want to discover about what's going on.
That was Saigon, the city where I'm from. And that closes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jan. It was a lot of information. Thank you very much. Okay, if you want, you can stop sharing, and we're going to pass to all the questions that we have here in the chat box. Okay, a lot of people wanted to share a lot of things that we have seen here.
Caroline, I'm gonna stop the recording, okay?
Yes, stop recording, yes.